Yeah.
Thank you, Greg. That's very generous. So I encourage you all to stop by all of our sponsor booths that are out in the foyer here. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in here at 11, where we're going to hear from many of the larger cloud providers that we all know.
I'm in for conference.
Role I play. I spent the summer in Japan once.
If I could get everybody to take their seats and make their way back in the ballroom, we're going to go ahead and get started to try and stay on time. This morning we heard, from a number of government agencies, and now we're going to hear from a number of, the leading cloud providers, all of who you know. And here to moderate the session is SIIA's own David LeDuc, who's our Senior Director of Public Policy and works closely with, our panelists. So I'll turn it over to David. David, introduce the panel.
Thanks, Rihanna. This on? Thanks so much, Rihanna. It's a be here today, and we've got an excellent panel. This event is largely IT folks speaking to the audience, but we do like to mix it up and think it's very valuable to integrate cloud providers and get the perspective of cloud providers. And in this expert panel, what we'd like to do is to explore not only the basics of cloud computing, obviously, but to get into some of the details of the bigger picture on the cloud. A lot of the emphasis, as Dave McClure mentioned, is on shared services, and integrating cloud computing to increase efficiency and save money, reduce costs. And I'd like to talk with some of these experts and get their insights into how they believe the government's doing, how it's working out, and to provide advice and insights to agency folks here with us today. So the four panelists I'd like to introduce. Dan Burton is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Global Public Sector for Salesforce.com. Dan played a leadership role in development of U.S. technology policy for over 20 years. Prior to joining Salesforce in 2006, Dan also served with Entrust and worked for Novell. He was also president of the Council on Competitiveness, where he was a pioneer in the effort to establish government technology policies for the high-tech industry. Gunnar Hellickson, down there, is the Chief Technology Strategist for Red Hat's U.S. Public Sector Group, where he works with system integrators and government agencies to encourage the use of open source software in government. Gunnar is one of Federal Computer Week's Fed 100 for 2010. That was a big honor for Gunnar a couple of years ago. He's an active member of the Military Open Source Working Group and a GTO 21 commissioner. David Michalczyk with Google. On the end, David is the head of Google Apps Federal, and he focuses on bringing Google's cloud computing technology to government customers to help them improve performance and reduce costs. David also manages Google's compliance with FISMA and other federal security requirements. Prior to joining Google, David was a senior manager in Accenture's federal strategy practice. And finally, Andras Sokol with IBM. He's the vice president and chief technology officer of IBM US Federal. Andras is responsible for IBM's industry solution technology strategy in support of the U.S. federal customer. Andras was appointed IBM Distinguished Engineer and Director of IBM's Federal Software Architecture Team in 2005. And he leads a department of technologists responsible for developing e-government software architectures using IBM technology and solutions. With that introduction, again, it's a delight to have you all here joining us today. I thought we would just start out with some brief remarks. Might as well go in alphabetical order. Dan, would you like to kick it off?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I remember when this conference was SaaS.gov, and now it's CloudGov, and who knows, it may have a few more iterations to go. And I would like to just start with the comment that the cloud computing debate is over. And I think it's over in two fundamental ways that it's important to recognize. I think, first of all, it's over in the public sector and government, which is what we're focused on here, because there is no vendor, there is no integrator, there is no consultant out there who says the cloud is not the way to go. So everyone has realized that it is inevitable that the federal government, just like state and local governments, will shift to cloud platforms, cloud infrastructures, cloud applications, and that train has left the station. And there's still a lot of work to do in terms of what do those implementations look like, what's the best model, what is genuine cloud offerings. We think it's sort of multi-tenancy, and what is really a false cloud. I think the other trend is the cloud debate is also over in a different way. And certainly this is how we view the world at Salesforce. And our CEO, Mark Benioff, said in 1999 that Salesforce was born social, born cloud, and that we were really the poster child for a lot of cloud applications. And in 2009, 10 years later, we were reborn social. And we really feel like that the whole push for organizations is going to be towards a social enterprise. And that is, how do you take these cloud technologies provided on a multi-tenant architecture, accessed securely over the internet, anywhere on mobile devices. How do you take those to change culture and create a social enterprise? The private sector is already off to the races doing that. The public sector, oddly enough, is further along than people may think. If you look at GSA, for example, Dave McClure spoke this morning, and GSA has a whole social strategy that they're pursuing. Very interesting. So I think those are the big opening comments. The cloud debate is over. It's over because everyone agrees that it is inevitable, both on the IT side as well as on the customer side. And it's over because there's a whole new phase we're moving into, and it's all about social enterprise.
You might as well just go, Andras. We'll just go down the line.
All right, great. Andras Sakalian of IBM. I jotted down a few thoughts listening to some of the speakers today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. So we've come out of this recent last few years of extreme excitement around cloud computing to realize that, that there's a little bit more than just cloudiness involved, right? And it's this realization that, it's a paradigm shift that has many different shifts underneath of, quote, the cloud, right? You have resource pooling, you have virtualization, you even have big data, analytics, cybersecurity, and even the administration's recent identification of the need to move to shared services is a realization that there are multiple paradigms within the cloud, right? So kind of cloudy techniques and shifts are going on. Historically, if we look at paradigm shifts, they were very concrete, but technology is moving so rapidly that many of these shifts are occurring at the same time. Mobility, collaboration, social computing, all occurring simultaneously. So when we talk about cloud, we have to be concrete in terms of what our strategy is and what our implementations are. So certainly IBM offers a wide breadth of technologies that run from hybrid cloud to our government community cloud. And we're embracing the idea of shared services and SaaS services and offering the appropriate services. The primary services that we're offering in the cloud, when we talk about in the cloud, we're talking about, off-prem, really, in this community, are around email collaboration, enterprise messaging, content management, and then there are some, really appropriate opportunities for many of the agencies who run kind of virtual market commerce type of applications to create, Peapod-like services, and we have a significant presence already in the commercial SaaS environment with Sterling Commerce that we're offering in the federal space. I think it's really important that if you take the tactical approach to cloud computing, you're liable to become fragmented and disassociated with your business architecture that needs to inform your enterprise architecture, which eventually defines your IT implementation to support the implementation of your strategic business mission. So I think we really need to get down into, as strategists, as leaders, as technologists, understanding the implications of selecting cloudy technologies to support our enterprise architecture and business missions. And I think, IBM obviously has a wide variety of technologies to do that.
All right, so excuse me, Gunnar Hellickson from Red Hat. So Red Hat's, as most of you probably know, the largest pure open source company in the world. We're, with any luck, we'll hit $1 billion a year this year, which is right around, which is pretty amazing considering we sell free software, right? As an open source advocate, and I see a lot of complements between these cloud implementations and cloud consumption models and open source, as you can imagine. And like my colleagues over here, cloud is actually composed of a number of actually much more boring problems underneath, right? I mean, they're actually persistent problems. There's nothing new about them. And we see this in some of the guidance that's come out of OMB, right? So we've got shared first, which is trying to encourage, yet again, reuse amongst the agencies. I mean, we've been at this for 30 years, but maybe this time it'll work. We see things like a FedRAMP trying to ensure some kind of sharing of, not of implementation, but of process, right? So the security process. So trying to lower the barrier to entry for new applications, and also trying to decrease the implementation costs of the stuff that we've already got. So I see there's this path is kind of fraught with peril, though, because a lot of people are moving to cloud and believe that cloud is, well, if I buy this piece of equipment from a vendor roughly the size of a refrigerator, maybe that'll be a cloud, right? And then I can go tell my boss that I did a cloud implementation, and OMB won't give us a hard time for spending money on it. I think that there is still too much thinking in that way. I think that certainly Dan and I agree that a cloud is much more about having services on demand, having much more elasticity and flexibility in your infrastructure, and buying a refrigerator is kind of the opposite of flexibility and agility, right? So this is why OMB is encouraging agencies to consolidate capital spending with the CIOs. Because if we keep having all the capital expenses distributed throughout each of the programs, it becomes very difficult to kind of corral everyone and get them onto a shared architecture, right? I think the shared first policy, which is in draft now and maybe deployed, I'm not sure when they're going to roll it out, hopefully by April, because that's when the first deliverables due. But the shared first policy is really interesting. It tells agencies basically, before you go buy a new item, before you go buy a new capability, you need to go make sure that another agency hasn't already purchased it. And if you do buy a new item, then you need a note from your doctor. So this is kind of a higher order version of the cloud first policy that we've been working under for the last 2 years. I think that the shared first policy is going to drive a lot of, obviously sharing amongst the agencies, but it is also going to encourage agencies to be much more modular in their thinking. They're going to start taking these big monolithic applications and start decomposing them a little bit into discrete pieces, because it's easier to share many small pieces than it is to share one big monolithic application. I don't know, I got my fingers crossed. This is going to be kind of an exciting time over the next 2 years between cloud first, shared first, and FedRAMP. I think I'm actually very optimistic about kind of a profound change, not just in the way we implement IT and federal government, but also in how we procure it.
Thanks. David?
I agree. It is a very exciting time. And I agree with many of the points that have been made here by my colleagues. I'll go over just a few from our point of view in terms of what we're seeing in the public sector and federal, state, and local government. The cloud is mainstream in government. We have seen incredible adoption that's happened in the public sector, in the state and local government, and in the federal government. I think that has outpaced expectations. I started at Google about 5 years ago, and when I started, people told me I was crazy to be doing it. Once they found out what I was doing, oh, you're working on cloud computing in government. that's a bad idea. You're crazy for doing this, because the government will never adopt cloud computing. Maybe this will happen in a state and local government or a county government somewhere, but it would never happen in the federal government, because the federal government has all of these requirements and FSMA and the way they procure things. This will never happen. So set something up for later, because this is not going to happen in the federal government. And lo and behold, it has happened. And not only has it happened, it's becoming mainstream. So we see with, in the case of Google's applications, which are for messaging and collaboration, so things like email, instant messaging, collaborations for documents, spreadsheets, and presentations and video. This platform, which is available 100% through a web browser, is now being used by whole state governments, like the state of Wyoming and the state of Utah, and whole cities like the city of Philadelphia, the city of Orlando, and counties and police stations, and it's being used by entire federal agencies like the General Services Administration and NOAA. So we've seen this really take off, and we've seen other agencies now interested in replacing their email and collaboration systems with a cloud-based system. And as others have mentioned, we've seen the government begin to set up the processes that are required to really help spur this adoption even further. So, so I think that's the first point around the momentum that we've seen in the government space with cloud. I think the second point is that we're realizing that the benefits of cloud and the drivers for moving to cloud computing are not just about the CIO's office. They're not just about the benefits for back-end IT, which are significant, unquestionably, and it is one very important driver. The other driver, I think, that is becoming more predominant now is that it's the realization that cloud computing is not just about doing the same thing cheaper, but it's about doing things that you couldn't do before. And this is where the benefits to federal employees, to overall productivity, to the ability to be able to work smarter and in a different way. I hear from federal employees all the time that they are more productive at home managing their kids' soccer game or their child's preschool or you name it, or managing their wedding with consumer tools than they are at work. President Obama has said that the children of federal employees have more powerful technology in their backpack on the way to school than many of their parents do when they get to their desk at the federal government. And this is true. There is a lot of frustration. And it has to do with an enterprise model that has not been on the same path of innovation as the consumer model. So what Google is doing is to take our consumer technology, bring it to the enterprise, and jump that innovation curve. And what it allows for is the expectations that federal employees have from what they're using at home. They're able to get these same type of capabilities at work. They're able to work in the same document at the same time with 20 other people working in the document, character by character, seeing what each one of them is writing. They're able to have 25 gigabytes of storage in the mailbox. They're able to do a video chat with someone in another country right from the web browser. They're able to work from home and be very effective. So all of those things. It's not just about doing the same thing cheaper. That's not very exciting. It's about doing things you couldn't do before. And I think the last point I would make is that the cloud is enabling other objectives of where the federal government wants to get to. Dan mentioned social, a very important objective that's being enabled by cloud computing platforms. And I think the other is mobility and the desires around more choices for federal government employees and public sector employees in the area of mobile. So when you have a cloud computing platform that is web-based, based on open standards, we're seeing other possibilities open up in terms of mobile platforms. So we see more and more agencies either moving away from some of their traditional mobile platforms to others, or diversifying their mobile platform so that, again, more and more of their employees can have that experience that they have in the consumer world, an iPhone, an Android device, a Windows phone, whatever it might be. They have that experience now at work as well, and the cloud is enabling that. Those are my thoughts.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for opening with very insightful thoughts. There's a theme that definitely resonated across the 4 panelists, and obviously we've got 4 companies here that represent in some cases, different components of enabling cloud. So I think that's useful. But the notion of smarter, better, social, and mobile were 4 things that I took away, and I think I wanted to focus our discussion on as key points of the cloud. As Dan mentioned, we've been here for years. We've been talking about this for years, but the further along we've gone, and I think Salesforce is a perfect example of this, we're not just talking about cloud anymore. We're talking about how it's better, how it's mobile, how it's faster. So I think that's great. That's part of what I'd like to talk about more today. But one of the high-level questions I'd like to start off talking about is security. Security is another issue we've been talking about for so long. I feel like we've really made a lot of progress on that. 5 years ago, we talked cloud. People say, cloud? Ooh, I don't know. Is it secure? What? I can't trust the cloud. I mean, is that pretty much, everyone gets it now, right? I mean, Dan, you want to talk to that?
Yes, well, thank you for that question, David, because that is still the threshold question. And this is where I think the public debate in Washington has not been helpful. And Vivek Kundra, who was former federal CIO and who is now my boss at Salesforce, was famous for saying, I want government to stop hiding behind the private cloud. And so there was this sense that, gee, if you're government and you really need security, you have to have a private cloud. And then that was defined in ways so that it really looked like a lot like outsourced legacy IT infrastructure, which people had been doing for 20, 30 years. And the real issue is if you're a federal agency, you don't care whether you have a public cloud or a private cloud or a banana cloud. What you really care about is, does your vendor meet federal security requirements? That is the discussion. It's not what the model is. And if you look at a company like Salesforce, we were actually the second company after Google. You get the moderate FSMA certification from GSA. We have a moderate FSMA certification from the SEC. We have a moderate FSMA certification from the Department of the Interior. We have a moderate FSMA certification from HHS. We have a moderate FSMA certification from the Department of Commerce. So it's like these security issues have been addressed. And rather than put them in this false taxonomy, or gee, is it a public cloud and that must be insecure, or a private cloud and that is de facto secure, that is really a nonsensical way to talk about this. And what agencies should look at is, what are the federal security requirements? Is my vendor meeting them? And can I trust them with confidence?
Anyone else want to expand on that? Or is it?
Sure. I think we're probably all going to want to make a comment on this topic. Yeah, I would agree with Dan that we understand as an industry how to secure SaaS services or whatever cloud service you're providing. IBM has a medium robustness cloud. We also have a high assurance cloud that we can place high assurance Intel DoD applications into. That's probably something that not many others can say. We're implementing cloud solutions that provide storage as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and we're adopting utility computing models in order to actually provide that option for the program or agency. However, that said, I mean, our belief is that you need to have a well-defined business architecture, which informs your enterprise architecture, which ultimately defines and informs your implementation architecture. And it's not about whether or not you're outsourcing your technology. It's about whether you have the right solution. And this is where I think we would differ in others in the industry who would say you need to give up all of your IT infrastructure to us. I think that's an option. It's probably, it's the message you're going to hear from companies that are offering that one dimension of SaaS, but you need to think in terms of how your technology infrastructure needs to change or evolve with these new cloudy technologies in parallel with the strategic business mission.
But I just want to stop you all before we continue. I've got a request for everyone to slowly put your hand in your pocket, and if you have a phone, either turn it off or pull it out and set it on the set it away from your mic, just so that we don't have interference. But I left mine over there, and I feel a little uncomfortable being so far from this. Someone's probably talking on it. But go ahead, Connor.
The security, the case of the security question is actually, I think, a specific instance of the larger, this like larger trend where like cloud is being used as a forcing function to get agencies and vendors to do the stuff they should have been doing in the first place, right? Because as people move to these cloud environments, they have to change again how their procurement works, right? The FedRAMP, right, came about because Amazon didn't want to file for FSMA paperwork 17 times for 17 different agencies, right? Well, that makes sense. Would that we had something like FedRAMP 10 years ago, even before, I mean, put cloud to the side, right? Just for a vendor to be able to point to a central repository of FSMA paperwork and say, no, we're already approved, and you can just reuse this guy's paperwork. That would have been amazing. And so, thankfully, cloud has come along, and now that's kind of cleared the decks, and now we get to take a close look at how the acquisition works, how our CNA works, how our enterprise architectures work. I know a number of agencies are thinking about cloud deployments, or they're under these cloud mandates, and they suddenly realize, like, oh, wait a minute, we don't have an enterprise architecture. We need to get an enterprise architecture, so now we can actually properly move this stuff in the cloud, because you can't take the same mess that's in your data center and move it up to Dan's product, right, or Andres' product, or David's product. So I think the security question is now, again, it's an implementation question. I agree with the last two. I think it's a question not whether is it secure or isn't it secure. It's how do we actually get security right in the first place.
Anything to add, David?
Again, I agree with much of what's been said. Security is very important. It's extremely important for Google. In the end, security is important for information technology, period, whether it's cloud or anything else. And you can evaluate the security of cloud computing as you can evaluate the security of other information technology. You can have an empirical review of the security controls that are in place, and you can analyze them based on the risk frameworks that exist in the federal government today. And that's exactly what's been done, and that's what's enabled the public sector to adopt our technology with confidence. So we're going to continue to stay focused in this area of security. And I think it's worth pointing out, I guess, two things that I would add. One is that we find that there are many agencies that see they get a security upgrade from moving to a cloud computing environment. There are a number, I was speaking with one federal agency that today has a traditional outsourced model for their email where an integrator is running their email environment on premise. It's at FSMA low today, and there are over 50,000 users on this email system. So many agencies see an upgrade by going to FSMA Moderator, or even agencies at FSMA Moderator today see that in the cloud there are some things that we're able to do on a large scale with security in managing some of the controls that may not be in place today. But I do agree very much with Dan in terms of this point on what we're seeing in these original definitions established by NIST now going on 5 years ago. When we look at the definitions of cloud computing and the delivery models and public-private community, I do think it's been confusing because we're really looking at the delivery model as a proxy for what the security is, and it's not true. A private cloud, by its nature, is not more secure for being called private. It may be more secure, absolutely. You can make a private cloud suitable for a classified environment if you have the right controls in place. It may have no locks on the door and and a convicted felon running the operation as well. You don't know if and it's still called a private cloud. So you need to evaluate the security controls that are in place and not just say, oh, I've got a private cloud, so it must be secure. I compare it to the aviation industry, right? I mean, you might have a private plane, but it is not necessarily more secure than a commercial aircraft, right? If it's a two-seater Cessna and I'm flying it, that private plane is not as safe as what you'd fly in the multi-tenant version of that, a 777 from United. So I think agencies are looking at that, and security is about reviewing the actual security controls that are in place.
And I'll add to that, actually. I think so some of the standards that are coming out of NIST, like it actually came out of the federal desktop core configuration, but are now being taken up into this cloud work. So if you read the FedRAMP ConOps, they're pointing directly at standards like SCAP, or the Secure Content Automation Protocol, which is this incredible tool that allows you to send a set of security expectations to your cloud provider, and then they send back a set of results that can be consumed by machines. So now this dream of kind of continuous security monitoring is actually becoming a practical reality. This is really very exciting, and so I agree with David. I think that in many cases it's going to be a security upgrade. If for no other reason, then we're going to be retooling our security processes in order to accommodate these new cloud deployments.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I mean, my response to that is always, is the cloud secure? I say, compared to what? And I think that really helps people along the line of, oh yeah, it is, because then they start looking at it, and so that's what I take away. I think we all heard it here. Yes, the cloud is secure. No, it's not one size fits all. You've got public clouds, you've got private clouds, you've got hybrid clouds. We ought not focus on, on the method, but decide the solution that works best, both secure. And I think Dave McClure touched on those. I'd like to raise another question and inject a point that he made earlier. He was talking a bit about the government being a different customer. The government's a different customer. He mentioned, obviously, the federal government's focused on low and security, low and moderate security levels. That's where most of their FedRAMP is focused. That's where they've been telling agencies in cloud first to go low and moderate first. But so kind of a two-parted question to you all. So how is cloud affecting and changing the culture of government, and is this something that needs to focus on just low and moderate, or are we also talking about critical applications too? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
I think that it definitely, again, if we talk in terms of cloudy technologies, all of these different new paradigms that we have, whether it be resource pooling, virtualization, and some of the new security technologies, all of these have an opportunity to really modernize our infrastructure, especially if we move towards a kind of a shared first thought. But we have to implement the shared first infrastructure. And then we can embrace, whatever delivery model, we want that makes the most sense, that defines our end-to-end business value chain, right? So I think that it's important to understand that you need, that's why the federal government, the administration went to this, recently, this idea of, shared resources, shared computing, infrastructure, and this is not so dissimilar to some of the work that we did, and in fact I did. If you look at the AFI website, I have several papers that I authored with several prominent folks at the time on shared services, and that's a 5-year-old concept. Well, we kind of fell down in our implementation of shared services because SIIA really was an initiative that was so focused on infrastructure and technology that it didn't tie back to business, and it just, the business leaders didn't grok, the value of SIIA, but in reality, SIIA and cloud computing being kind of the evolution of service-based computing, are very similar, and we still have this need today to implement that shared service infrastructure to move forward with cloud computing, including the consumption of cloud services that are outside our primary control, that are third-party off-prem provided services.
Yeah, To jump on that, I think I'm really interested by the platform as a service space. That is really taking off, especially in DoD and the intelligence community. And so talking about culture changes, right? When you move to these shared services or even to a platform as a service, a lot of agencies and a lot of these programs think about it as like there are going to be winners and losers, right? Because my value, both as an individual and as an organization, is directly tied to the number of applications that I own or the number of capabilities that I own. And that's something that has to, in fact, that's called out in the shared first document. I mean, that's something that is definitely going to change. It just has to. It's not sustainable. You know, if the capability required is for potato chips, you've got one program that gets salty potato chips, another one's salt and pepper, another one's jalapeno, another one's barbecue. I mean, we can't work like that any longer. And I think what a lot of agencies are realizing is that these platform as a service or even shared services offerings allow for not just more modularity and not just for the cost savings of having a single infrastructure for a particular capability, but also they're finding some advantages in the serendipity that comes with having all of these services available, right? So now we have developers who can suddenly compose capabilities out of stuff that already exists, whereas before that something would have been a $10 million procurement. Now a guy can do it in his basement over a weekend.
Business process management.
Business process management, right? I mean, it's really, really remarkable transformation, and I think the acquisition and the procurement and the CNA processes really have to catch up with this, with the power of what these platforms can do.
Yeah, I think this point about culture is really important, and I think it's what we'll be talking about more and more as we talk about cloud computing now. And when we met at this conference 5 years ago, when we talked about cloud, we were talking more to the CIO group and the benefits of cloud computing and cost savings and the business case. I think that's insecurity and all of these points. I do think that is generally understood and accepted, and there are questions about how to implement now and choices to be made. But what we're seeing now is more of this focus on what it means for users, and it means a lot for users, and we still don't know all of the impacts. But it's what we see in terms of the culture is that employees are more productive. They're working smarter. They're moving into the ways that they're required to work now. There's much more collaboration. There's much more working in teams. There's the ability to work interagency, the ability to work with remote teams. Even things that we saw at GSA, where the focus was on making sure that the email system was up and running, but GSA employees had access to Google Docs as well. And even though that wasn't a focus of the deployment, we found that there were thousands and thousands of users that just looked at this, saw it was available, and they started using Google Docs and recognized that there's a different way to author content. That it's not just you work on something by yourself, you get to the point where you think you're finished, and then you email it to someone else or print it out and bring it to their desk. That you can actually be working on it, and 5 other people are watching you type it, and they change something. It can be humbling too, right? They change something as you're typing it. They write their own thing. It's a different way of working. I think that's how we're seeing it change the culture. What can happen with platform as a service and big data is a totally new area that I think we've only begun to see the impact on culture.
So I'll try not to be redundant while agreeing with all of my fellow panelists here, because culture that is the big issue. And I spent 25 years of my life doing public policy, technology policy in Washington across think tanks, different companies. And a year ago, I shifted over to the business side. And the reason that I did that is because I feel that the most important policy issue facing us, facing everyone in this room, many of you probably don't think of yourselves as public policy mavens, is to get government on the cloud. And the reason why is that fundamentally changes culture, it changes connections with citizens, it changes the delivery of services, it changes collaboration, and therefore transforms government. So it is a profound policy effort that I think that we're all involved in, which is sort of bottled under government procurement, a strange place for it to be. And if you look at GSA, Salesforce has an enterprise license agreement with 17,000 GSA employees and contractors. And we are following Google with many collaborative tools in there. And Martha Johnson says, I want to use this technology to change the GSA culture. And she is very forthright about that. And so I think that is the big payoff from all these technologies. And just as a side comment on platform as a service, I think this is the unwritten story in government right now. Because when we look at platform as a service, and Salesforce, according to IDC and I think Gartner, we are the leading platform as a service provider today, bar none. 60% of our government pipeline, platform as a service. So what you see, sort of, it's not really reported, is all these government agencies are saying, hey, I want this platform because I can develop all these cool applications specific to me, share them across the agency, and I'm just getting a platform as a service solution to do that. So I think that is sort of another big wave that's coming through this marketplace.
Thanks, guys. I want to be fair here, but we could all sit here and talk about the cloud all day, and we love this
we
stuff.
couldn't.
But I want to make sure we open it up. We open it up to the audience and give you all a chance to raise questions. So if there are folks who have questions, there's a couple of standing mics. I see there's a gentleman here. Perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jason Bloomberg with ZapThink, a division of Dovell. My question has to do with service level agreements for the cloud. Now, for infrastructure as a service, it's pretty straightforward because it's pretty much a hosting environment. But we have some software and platform as a service vendors on the panel. So I wanted to ask, well, what is your approach to providing SLAs for your SaaS and PaaS customers, in particular in government? That's what we're getting from our government agency clients as well. I want to move to SaaS, but what's our service level agreement? And you can't find, say, Salesforce. So Salesforce, the rumor on the blogosphere is that Salesforce doesn't provide SLAs to any customers unless they're really beaten up by a customer. So I don't want to put Salesforce on the spot, but I do.
Jason, I'm assuming that question was directed to me.
Well, actually Google as well, being both SaaS and PaaS.
Someone else want to take that?
Well, first of all, there's subscription level agreements, different kind of SLA, and we post those on our website. If you're a small company, you want to come in and buy cloud apps or PaaS right off the website, there's a subscription level agreement. It's click through, you can do that. With our larger government customers, obviously those subscription agreements and the services that go with them are negotiated and they're private to those customers. So.
What about Google?
Ours is online and available. It's very simple service level agreement when it comes to software as a service and platform as a service as well. When we do a major contract with a government organization, there is an opportunity for negotiation around the service level agreement, but it's pretty basic. We try to keep it simple about here's what we're promising around uptime and availability and some other metrics. And so, what are you seeing as the concern? Am I allowed to ask questions back? What are you seeing as?
Well, it's sort of interesting having Google and Salesforce on the panel because as companies, you've taken very different approaches to this question, right? Google has just pulled all their terms of service together and unified them, but Salesforce has been rather slippery with regards to this, distinguishing between subscription and service level agreements.
So can I just make one comment? Certainly responsive to the word slippery. Because if you look at Salesforce's service performance, I would argue that we are the most transparent company out there. If you go to trust.salesforce.com, I mean, you can see how many transactions we did a day, how fast they are, if there's any service issues or interruptions, and all the information about that. You can see all the security issues that are there, all the privacy issues, how it fits globally, and so we are totally transparent in that. And so I think that if you are a customer, that's what you care about, and so you can actually look and see how the system is performing, and you can see sort of in real time how well we're doing.
So I know that you probably want to speak just to the traditional SaaS providers about this because there's been this constant discussion about well, what happens if I have multi-tenancy and the government comes in and takes down the site and all that kind of stuff, and what is my service level agreements, and I agree that that's very important. However, at the end of the day, customers are looking for concrete SLAs and self-service that are part of the contract for implementing the service. Now, some of these are evolving standards that are going to be part of this technology as it evolves. However, IBM has implemented a layer as part of our architecture of all of our SaaS services and all of our computing model capabilities called the BSS layer, the Business Software Services layer, which provides those KPIs and allows the customer to determine their qualities of services through that layer. And it's very transparent. We understand we created transaction-based computing. So we think that over a period of time, this discussion will go away in lieu of the BSS architecture becoming more defined and standardized within the industry.
And so, as the last guy to talk, so we also have a platform as a service. A lot of people don't know we have a product called OpenShift. The reason why you haven't heard about it is because it's free, and it's mostly for us. It's a greenhouse or a test bed to try some of this stuff out and see how customers react to it, see how it transforms the way they work. So. And one of the things that has come up, obviously, is SLAs. So if we were to eventually charge money for a level of service on this, what kind of SLAs do people require? One thing that's come up a lot, and I think it's surprised us, is that there be, as part of the service level agreement, actually having exit costs rolled into the agreement. So that there is, because one of the virtues and one of the things all four of us talk about is the ability to move your workload from one place to another and find the best deal and et cetera. That's not possible to procure accurately or well unless you know actually what the exit costs for the service is, as well as the entry cost. The entire FAR, right, is built around entry costs. It spends no time talking about exit costs. I think just like FedRAMP, actually, I would love to see some kind of and you guys may hate me for saying this, but I would love to see a kind of pooling of service level agreements or some kind of like common understanding of what a government service level agreement would look like. Dawn, I'm looking at you. Because I think it would, first of all, it would encourage adoption, but it would also ensure that the government had some kind of consistent set of controls in place. Because I think that once you move to a platform as a service or a software as a service, people are going to find it extraordinarily difficult to leave that service unless they actually are, unless the provider is contractually bound to make it easier for them.
But this goes back to the old vendor lock-in discussion too.
Yeah.
I've never believed in this, the whole hype and discussion around vendor lock-in. I think when an organization makes a technology decision that's based on, their strategic directions and their business requirements, and they become invested in it, it is, by its very nature, difficult to extract yourself out of that relationship because you've got your business running on that platform. It doesn't matter whether you own it or whether you're going to outsource it. It is the nature of the beast.
There are safeguards you can put in place to make it easier or harder.
Well,
right?
you can have agreements and some agreements for how you would basically take back your data, right? But even then, it's not only going to be a matter of taking back your data, but what format are you going to take it back in? It's going to be a transformation, just like you would do any systems migration or transformation project. It's going to require some elbow grease.
And just the last point I'd make on this is that I think there are parallels between this SLA discussion and the security discussion that we had earlier, because the concept of an SLA is not new, or the concept of the government understanding that it needs to have these contractual assurances in place for outsourced services that it's using. That's not new, and so it's applied to the cloud. I think the government is looking at the same thing, and just like security, in the area of service level agreements, there are areas where the government actually gets more. In our example, and in many cloud providers, we have zero planned downtime. So we don't factor in planned downtime to our service level agreement. Many existing service level agreements for on-premise and even some cloud providers say, yeah, we're up, whatever percentage of the time, but we're not including the planned downtime that we have on, weekends or whenever it is. So that's an improvement that we see.
I see they're sneaking around the room ready to pull us off the stage here, but there's a gentleman who's been waiting very patiently, so I'd like to give you the opportunity, one question, if you
One
can concise,
question.
and then go down the panel and kind of wrap it up.
Absolutely. This question's for David Mihalchik. Many would argue that Google was the first cloud service provider before the term even existed. And I've been told and I've read and I've seen that Google doesn't use virtualization or SANs. If SIIA is to become the private cloud provider for all of the DoD and its partners, at what point do you hit a critical mass and decide that virtualization and SANs is or are a obsolete technology and you have to move to something else?
Well, it definitely won't be my decision. Leave that to the to our engineering team.
Or did Google reach a critical mass and then change, or did you start right off the bat and know that virtualization and SANs would not satisfy the demand, the I/O demand that you're going to have with the services that you're going to offer globally?
Yeah, I think the model that we followed originally, you're right, Google is a company that was built from the ground up as a cloud, starting in Larry and Sergey's garage, literally. But the model that we've followed, and much of this is discussed in the literature, and Google has discussed it. The approach that we take is different to the virtualization approach and the approach that others are taking to cloud. But in terms of the future, your question, I'm not qualified to answer.
I wouldn't mind jumping in on this a little bit because I do agree
I
with
will
your
allow you to
observation.
do that.
I don't think that Google actually decided to go to a distributed data model because they're a SaaS provider. They went there because they have massive data requirements. And so if you look at the SAN industry right now in the market space, you see a significant downturn in that market space because that cloud-based, network-based implementations, and especially operating on big data, requires a more parallel storage model in which you don't have that single point of failure and that single pipe in which you're pushing all of the data through into a SAN. And so we are seeing within IBM and other technology providers a race to the next generation storage devices and capabilities that have more of a spider topology than a single pipe topology. So your observation is exactly right, spot on. And Google went and obviously tried to solve that internally by building their own infrastructure. But from a commercial technology point of view, we're just catching up to that because big data has got such a huge impact on how we store and the throughput necessary.
And
Just for the record, Salesforce doesn't use virtualization either. We were built from the ground up without it. We still don't use it.
And this isn't a question then? I know I was only allowed one.
All right.
I just hope we don't invest in an obsolete technology just to find out later that we spent a lot of money
Well, so
just to
I think what
switch over.
you'll find, and I hope you guys agree with me, that moving something to cloud as a delivery model, it's completely decoupled from the implementation. And in fact, what cloud means as a provider, what we've figured out is that it's really just a process optimization, right? Google, most significant thing about Google is not which hardware they bought or whether they're using virtualization. It's the way that their architecture is laid out and the way that their internal processes work that allow them to have this, take full advantage of commodity hardware, recover quickly from failure, be highly distributed. I mean, that's where the secret sauce is. It's not that they chose VMware or Xen or KVM or something like that. Yeah.
I don't think that your SAN implementations are going to be, you don't need to throw them away.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing are these little paradigm shifts, and big data requires a different storage topology than your traditional enterprise computing storage needs.
And I think ultimately your question gets to the heart of what we talked about earlier. Does it make sense to build this yourself, or does it make sense to rely on providers who are doing this all the time? And we'll find out the answer to that over the coming years.
As I said, these guys can and do talk about cloud all day. We got to get off the stage, but they'll be around, so if you want to talk to them offline, I see there's a couple other folks with questions. I'm sure they'd love to chat more, and that's why they're here. So thanks so much to the panel for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.